Today we'll be specifically discussing the issues relevant to infrastructure as a service providers, such as the issues related to Microsoft licensing. And of course, I won't leave you with just proclaiming the issues. This is not that kind of event where we only agitate and don't give you solutions. We will tell you our recommended solutions, we'll outline them, and if you need any further information, please follow us. We talk about it a lot here, and if you need our professional help, obviously, you know where to find us. Welcome everybody, welcome all our friends, followers. My name is Alexander Gorev. If you're here for the first time, I am a partner in a boutique consultancy called SAMexpert. I've been around Microsoft for over 20 years, altogether probably 30 years, 20 years in software asset management. I started as a Microsoft evangelist. I was evangelizing Windows NT 3.5 at its time, and somehow ended up in the software asset management role. And about 10 years ago, I came to the service provider world, helping a service provider win an audit. So let's finally delve into the topic of today's conversation: perfecting Microsoft licensing for infrastructure as a service providers. The majority of providers that we work with are infrastructure as a service providers. The percentage of SaaS and platform as a service or professional MSP services like IT support with hosting is lower than either pure infrastructure as a service or infrastructure as a service with a few sprinkles on top. How do we define an infrastructure as a service provider? What is an infrastructure as a service provider? It's a business that provides the foundational platform for what we know these days as private cloud or public cloud hosting. If your services do not extend beyond providing rack space, hardware, and virtual machine rental, you are an infrastructure as a service provider. As for the Microsoft licenses, pure infrastructure as a service providers don't provide anything except the operating system, Windows Server. However, you may sometimes drop a few so-called managed clients into the mix with services on top of just renting virtual machines. And that may introduce a few more Microsoft licenses that you need to know and care about. Infrastructure as a service providers, in our experience, don't always use only their own data centers. You may provide infrastructure as a service services using other providers' hardware. It introduces additional complications to licensing. You can use their public cloud, you can use their rack space, including renting resources from hyperscalers like AWS and Google. It's perfectly permitted. But it adds licensing implications we need to talk about today too, as well. You only have 1 year left, if you do that, to prepare for what's coming in October 2025, and it's not a positive change, not at all. What Microsoft licensing options do you have if you run infrastructure as a service? It's not as simple as SPLA these days. There are quite a few, and navigating them is not an easy task even for a seasoned licensing consultant. There is SPLA, obviously there is SPLA, the traditional service provider licensing program from Microsoft. The main problem with SPLA for infrastructure as a service is that it wasn't designed for infrastructure as a service. If you read SPLA carefully, you will notice that it's a SaaS-centric licensing program. It was designed for ISVs, independent software vendors, that wanted to host their solutions themselves. And thus, there are fundamental challenges for infrastructure as a service providers regarding who is responsible for Microsoft licensing compliance, for example. In addition to SPLA, now we have CSP-Hosting. It has been around for 2 years and it's still confusing. The way it's being pushed as an SPLA replacement by licensing resellers isn't helping either, because it's not a SPLA replacement. It isn't. It is an alternative, but it's not a replacement. It's not a one-to-one transition. It's completely different. But if you speak to most resellers, they don't care. They aren't compensated on SPLA. It's purely financial interest. They're financially incentivized to promote CSP at all costs as Microsoft partners. You need to understand that. There's nothing bad about it. It's just a thing. And it's not like they have good knowledge and understanding of the CSP hosting program either, which isn't helping either. Plus, on top of that, as you normally provide only the operating system licenses, as you know, your clients will probably want to deploy additional Microsoft software on their own. Software like Microsoft SQL Server, Microsoft Office. They may also ask you if they can deploy VDIs using Windows 11 or Windows 10 operating systems. So all of it, obviously, introduces bring your own license challenges. And by the way, extended security updates for legacy operating systems, if any of your clients run legacy VMs for any reason, those are only available as bring your own licensing. You can't provide them as a SPLA provider or as an infrastructure as a service provider. And we can't avoid mentioning Microsoft's recent promise to introduce Azure Stack HCI for hosters. It's not the Azure Stack HCI that you know. That one is single tenant. They promised to the Association of European Cloud Service Providers, CSP, that they will soon announce Azure Stack HCI for hosters, which is multi-tenant, specifically for hosting providers. Nobody yet knows officially what the final product is going to look like and what the licensing requirements will be. I suggest you keep it on your radar unless you already are. At the very least, it's going to be interesting. And if you want to resell Azure services, I suspect Microsoft will offer it to service providers with the exact agenda for the service providers to provide them a channel to resell Azure services in their data centers. So we'll try to address the core issues of all of this complexity in today's conversation as much as we can, as much as the time permits, including our recommendations for the best practices. Now, let me try and deconfuse as much as I can the licensing options. First of all, SPLA is still around. And it will be around for at least 5 years from now. This is what Microsoft promised officially recently. Quite a few people, I would even say too many people, have been proclaiming the death of SPLA since 2015. I went to Reddit today, and I found posts from 9 years ago where people enthusiastically were saying that SPLA is going to die very, very soon, and there'll be a different licensing program replacing it. It's still around, it's still alive and kicking. However, do not expect it to change or evolve, because Microsoft wants to replace it with an alternative. They just need to find and define that alternative. And there are telltale signs that they are finding their way, not necessarily replacing it with a single program, but for example, they recently allowed SQL Server with Azure Arc to be run anywhere when it's connected to Azure Arc, including service providers. And if I were an end client, and if I needed a SQL Server that is not billed per month, but rather billed per minute, I would go with the option. I would still get a virtual machine and deploy SQL Server with Azure Arc and pay through Azure. Maybe. So Microsoft wants to replace SPLA, and they refuse to modernize SPLA. Keep that in mind. It's still the only native licensing program for service providers, including infrastructure as a service. There's no alternative. You may use it on single tenant, you may use it on multi-tenant hardware, bare metal, virtualized, doesn't matter. You can use it everywhere as long as you provide services alongside with these licenses. For infrastructure as a service, obviously we're talking about operating systems. Windows Server Data Center permits unlimited virtual machines. Windows Server does not require basic client access licenses. Windows Server CALs in the SPLA program, which simplifies licensing and makes it cheaper than on-premise. It's almost ideal for infrastructure as a service, but almost because there are some compliance complications, including remote desktop subscriber access licenses, which even when you provide virtual machines, may still be pinned on you by Microsoft during an audit. And there are some things you can do to avoid that, which we'll also discuss today. But SPLA is not the only program that's available to you. Since 2022, your clients may bring their own Windows Server licenses to your estate, and we are helping, at the moment, mid-sized European providers to define and design purely BYOL Windows Server infrastructures. It's absolutely possible and legitimate. So as long as you allow your own clients to bring their own licenses and bring the right infrastructure, why not? It's totally possible. You can avoid SPLA, at least partially. If you decide to switch to this model, there are a few crucial points that you must remember, mission-critical points. Point number one, there are no specific considerations or limitations on dedicated hardware. This is a general point for all your licensing needs. You need to understand, unless you already know, that as long as you aren't using Google's or Amazon's dedicated hosts for your own clients, you use your own or you rent it from a different service provider. Any license may be brought to the hardware that is single tenant, that is dedicated to an end client. That end client can bring any license. It almost works as if it were on-premise service, with an additional benefit that now you can also drop SPLA on top of it to the mix. But it gets serious when you want to license virtual machines with Windows Server, and that licensing is per virtual machine. For that purpose, if you want to allow your end clients to host their own licenses in your infrastructure for Windows Server, always consider building a separate infrastructure for BYOL. That is because it's going to mess up your SPLA profitability, your SPLA numbers. I'll explain now. When you license the host with Windows Server data center licenses, the cost of those licenses are shared by all the Windows Server virtual machines on the host. Any machines covered with end client licenses are effectively excluded from that SPLA cost sharing, thus affecting your SPLA margins. Should be obvious. You don't want to dilute the virtual machines you build them for using SPLA licenses. There is another concern, or you may say there's another consideration. Most of the popular cloud management software you use to manage your cloud, does not support conditional deployment, choosing where to deploy a new virtual machine based on the licensing rules. However, workarounds are possible, and some of the cloud management software vendors are aware and they are working on a necessary improvement. Just keep that in mind. You may need to consider that when you design a purely Windows Server bring your own license infrastructure. Does that Windows Server BYOL necessarily deprive you of license sales revenue because you don't use SPLA anymore? No, it doesn't. And yes, many infrastructure as a service providers don't want to deal with license sales. But if you do, you may sell CSP licenses for the virtual machines hosted in your public clouds. Moreover, if you want to bundle CSP licenses with virtual machines in a single service, that's when you should consider participating in the CSP-Hoster program. That will be your cue. We probably want to look at CSP-Hoster. I'm not necessarily saying you need to. You can avoid that. There is still a pretty high barrier to entry into CSP hosting. You must be a Tier 1 CSP. But Microsoft promises, they've been promising for 2 years, but I hope it'll happen soon. Microsoft promises to democratize it one day. We don't know when it will happen and how it will happen, but that was the promise when they introduced the program, that it will not stay with purely Tier 1 CSPs. So far, unfortunately, that's a requirement. It has its cons and pros, and let's start with a couple of positives. Firstly, it allows you to pre-activate the virtual machines with CSP-Hoster activation keys, which otherwise you would have to provide non-activated and potentially have additional load on your tech support explaining to the end clients how to activate the virtual machines they rented from you, which are not activated. If you're not a CSP hoster, you are only allowed to activate those machines on behalf of your end clients with their keys. If you're a CSP hoster, you get your own activation keys. The second benefit is cost-related, costs to the end client. Windows Server bundled with virtual machines does not require Windows Server cows, very much like in SPLA. So it may be cheaper for your end clients when they buy that license from you with the virtual machine, then bring your own license alternatives. I say it may be cheaper because it depends on what other licenses they have. It's not a one-size-fits-all benefit. But for the majority of especially small businesses and mid-sized businesses, that could be a good benefit, that they don't have to deal with client access licenses. And speaking of the negatives, there is one that is serious, because CSP hosting introduces management complexities. You will have to report bundled and bring your own licenses to Microsoft on a quarterly basis. Strictly speaking, there are only 3 product lines that you have to report. Fortunately, Windows Server, System Center, and SQL. That's it. Thanks to Microsoft for limiting that reporting just to those 3 product lines. You still have to do it. And these reports will be subject to compliance verification. So without a specialized tool, it may become a burden on your internal resources to manage all this. Yes, it's quarterly, but it must be managed and it must be accurately reported. Azure Stack HCI for hosters, if it's introduced. And I'm saying if, although it's promised in writing that it will be introduced. It will become another alternative for hosting virtual machines for multiple tenants, because it's a multi-tenant Azure Stack HCI. How that is going to work is subject to non-disclosure agreements. So let's wait until they disclose this information, they make it public. Just as I said, let's keep it on our radar. It's an interesting development. I'm not necessarily saying it's going to be 100% positive, but it's interesting. Coming up next in our today's event, safeguarding your business for BYOL compliance, preparing for October 2025, cost optimization, which is possible in infrastructure as a service, and how to manage all of it properly. What can you do today to start improving your management and your tools? There's an elephant in the room, And the name of the elephant is licensing compliance for the software that your end users deploy in your infrastructure, regardless of that you only provide virtual machines. Microsoft insists that the service provider is ultimately responsible for any piece of Microsoft software, regardless of who deployed it and who supports it. And it's a massive headache for infrastructure as a service providers. They don't even want to know what their end clients deploy. We give them physical and virtual machines. That is our service. We don't even have access inside the machines. I can't count the number of times I've heard this. And those of you who have had at least one SPLA audit, and there are people on the call that have, you know that the auditors will stubbornly insist on scanning every machine in your cloud estate regardless. Then they will attribute every piece of Microsoft software they find in the inventory to your compliance, unless you can provide solid evidence of bring your own license. Fortunately, there are safeguards you can put in place starting from today that should make your life easier in that regard. It will not stop the audit. It will not stop them insisting, but it will make your position much better in that dispute. They won't automatically dismiss the auditor's demand, but they will make it easier to try and minimize the audit scope and move the focus onto the end clients. And first of all, today or tomorrow, review your terms of service. Make it crystal clear what services you provide. There must be no doubt after reading your terms of service. And include the stipulations of where your license responsibility ends and where their license responsibility starts. If some of your end clients have custom contracts, which is often the case, especially with government contracts or large clients, you have to amend the standard contracts, potentially re-sign them, because otherwise, where is the line between you and them? So insist on it politely or bear the consequences. Demonstrating this bit will at least prove your intentions and that you have informed your end clients properly and clearly about their responsibility for the software you do not provide. Second consideration. Speaking about SPLA, you must include the so-called EULT and user license terms in every end client contract. It is your contractual responsibility to Microsoft. It's a stipulation in SPLA. It must be included in every end client contract, whether you have online terms of service, whether you have a master services agreement, whether you have a custom contract. We see issues asking government clients to modify their predefined government contract form. You still need to do it. There are ways to resolve this case by case in a negotiation after an audit, but you'd rather be prepared. There is a PDF file that you were given when you signed your SPLA. Find it and ensure every end client accepts the EULA terms. There are two benefits when they do that. By accepting the terms, end clients are informed about licensing compliance, and they agree to cooperate in an event of an audit. And thirdly, publish educational material on your website. Teach your end clients Microsoft licensing on your platform. They will appreciate it. Many of the mistakes they make are due to the lack of knowledge. Amazon does it brilliantly. I always suggest, if you don't want to write it yourself, if you don't want to come to a consultant like us to write this for you, look at Amazon. Copy and paste what they do, modify it, obviously. But the main principles, they are just explaining Microsoft licensing terms. I would be careful with looking at other providers because the quality of that material is not always great. For example, I would never advise copying Oracle's end client guides on Microsoft licensing for Oracle Cloud. They are slightly incorrect, I would put it this way, or confusing. What you need to successfully pass an audit is a compelling story supported by evidence. And by doing these three things, you are building that story. Where does it say that you're responsible for your end client compliance? SPLA says it in the contract. The way it is worded in SPLA may be challenged by a good lawyer. We've had cases when lawyers were laughing at how it's said in SPLA, but it's a contract. It's not a law. And Microsoft's intentions are still clear from those stipulations. They want you to be responsible for everything that your end clients do in your estate, even when you only provide the infrastructure. If you don't have a SPLA agreement and you are purely an infrastructure as a service provider, based on bring your own license basis. And there are providers popping up these days that do that. They don't have SPLA. It's all bring your own license. Thanks to Microsoft, it's allowed now. Microsoft will still insist that you are responsible for compliance. They have few reasons to come and audit you, but they will come up with something, I'm pretty sure. And there's a hint in one of the exam questions on Get Licensing Ready. It's a free of charge Microsoft licensing certification resource, the only one that's left. And in the SPLA certification path, I saw a question recently where they asked who is responsible for licensing compliance in an authorized outsourcer with bring your own license. And the correct answer is the provider. You may imagine that Microsoft vetted those answers, and that's how they think. Again, have a good lawyer, have a good partner. This can be challenged, but this is the default approach. What we're going to discuss next, preparing for October 2025, cost optimization for infrastructure as a service and how to manage all of it properly. Let's talk very quickly, because not everyone on the call is affected. What is about to happen in a year from now? It concerns those of you who resell physical and virtual machines hosted by so-called listed providers. Google, Amazon, and Alibaba for now. So when you resell those resources from those listed providers to your end clients, when you provide an infrastructure as a service, for example, Google's dedicated hosts, that's when it affects you. We consult American infrastructure as a service providers that use Google's single-tenant hosts. Google famously does not provide any Microsoft licenses on single-tenant hosts. They do it through a partner, strictly speaking. There's a big partner that does the majority of it. But nobody stops other providers from doing the same. An end client right now, what they can do now on the Google dedicated host, it's a very good example. They can either bring their own licenses, and the options there are extremely limited compared to normal providers. The licenses must be bought before October 2019 or on a contract that was signed before October 2019. It doesn't matter whether software assurance was renewed or not. What matters is when the license was initially bought. There's an unfortunate limitation of what licenses are eligible, and there's a quickly diminishing number of such licenses right now in the market. The other option they have right now is rent SPLA licenses from a service provider. They may rent SPLA licenses when provider provides them services on that Google dedicated host. So this second option will become impossible in only a year from now. You will be prohibited from using your SPLA licenses on listed providers in any way. What makes it worse is that Microsoft hasn't published any guidance on what to do when that date comes. So what can you do about it if you use the listed providers' resources in your services? Firstly, work actively with your listed providers. If you work with AWS like this, talk to them. If you work with Google like this, talk to them. Raise your concerns now. Learn what their ideas are, if they have them at all. I know that Amazon is working on a solution. They have been working on a solution. I need to update that information. Not sure about Google. We'll know soon. The second thing you need to do is educate your clients on bring your own license and help them sort it out, because you won't be able to provide SPLA licenses for such solutions anymore. Yes, it means learning the rules around license mobility and understanding the October 2019 threshold. In Europe, if you're in Europe, and if your dedicated hosts from a listed provider are located in Europe, you may advise your clients to use second-hand licenses. It's perfectly legitimate in the EU and in the UK to use second-hand licenses, to buy them on the second-hand market. There are specialized expert companies that resell such licenses. If those licenses were originally purchased in Europe before October 2019, they may be used on dedicated hosts on listed providers, so bear that in mind. The third option is migrate such workloads back to either your data centers or data centers of smaller providers. The world does not end with AWS and Google. There's Kyndryl, there's IBM Cloud, there's Oracle Cloud, there are other clouds and service providers of various shapes and forms. It doesn't necessarily have to be a tiny provider to where you're moving your end clients' workloads. There aren't that many options for an infrastructure as a service provider in terms of optimizing costs. Fortunately, the ones that exist are simple enough to understand. You will get them after I explain. It's very simple. Option number one, and it's pity that we rarely see this because it's a no-brainer, consolidate production Windows Server machines, bear with me on production, I'll explain. Windows Server machines licensed via SPLA. The word production here also includes development machines that are hosted for the end clients. They're all so-called production in SPLA. And dedicate hosts for such machines. Do not dilute Windows Server costs with Windows Client VDIs, with Linuxes, and even with Windows Server VMs licensed per virtual machine with bring your own license. Consolidating your SPLA Windows Server virtual machines on specific hosts will help you reduce SPLA costs because you will only need to report SPLA on those hosts. And consequently, it will increase SPLA margin per virtual machine. So consider this as your first and most important quick win. Cost optimization measure, consolidation of Windows servers. It's not that you need to move Linuxes away. It's not that you need to move Windows clients away. Think about it differently. Take Windows Server virtual machines that you pay for through SPLA and put them aside. This is your SPLA stake. These are the costs. It's a very simple measure. You can start doing it today. There'll be technical issues. There'll be people against it. There'll be people saying your provisioning system doesn't allow it, but at least you can start planning it. And speaking of production machines, I promised you to come back to this. What's the alternative in SPLA? It's not non-production, it's disaster recovery. Disaster recovery. Did you know that pure disaster recovery clusters don't require SPLA licenses? But they must be pure disaster recovery. You can't be half pregnant in terms of you can't run any production virtual machines in disaster recovery clusters. You can't run anything in those clusters unless you follow the rules of what and where you can run in those clusters that are stipulated in your SPLA agreement. It's not hidden knowledge. It's not forbidden knowledge. It's there. It's in your agreement. So as long as you follow those rules, your disaster recovery machines consolidated in a disaster recovery cluster don't require SPLA licenses. This is a huge cost-saving measure. Unfortunately, we do see providers that follow those rules, played by the book, and thus they reduce the costs. So as you can see, these are not difficult to understand, and it's quite surprising that there aren't that many providers that implement these cost-saving measures. Just do it. Just do it. It's not rocket science. So how to manage all this? It seems simple, but you still need to manage it. And this is $1 million question. How do we manage cost and compliance in the world of Microsoft infrastructure as a service? And I will repeat the banality. You need a tool. Otherwise, you will waste a lot of resource on proper management. We don't sell tools, but dealing with headaches with SPLA management and BYOL management and CSP-Hosting management and, well, Azure Stack HCI is coming. I'd rather you have a tool. It can be your in-house tool. You can write scripts, but make sure they account for all the human errors, because that's the downside of the scripts, that they designed for desired configuration. They don't account for potential human errors. It may be an add-on to an enterprise tool if you by mistake bought ServiceNow for your SPLA. We see those cases. We see Flexera deployed to manage SPLA and providing inaccurate numbers because the formulas are different. It just doesn't know how to calculate SPLA. But people write add-ons, people write workarounds. It's all totally possible. However, get a dedicated tool like Octopus Cloud. Just find a dedicated tool. There aren't that many. It's a very simple choice. You don't have to have an RFP between 5 or 10 providers. There are only 2, really. In addition, what you can start implementing today or tomorrow is the recommendations I just gave you concerning clarifying your terms of service and updating your end client contracts, and make sure all of your clients accept the ULT and user license terms. For all the known instances of bring your own license, this is a more difficult exercise, but again, begin doing it. Begin collecting solid evidence of it. Ask all such end clients to confirm that they bring their own licenses in writing. And as a second step, ask them to provide you with proof of license. And then create a secure, organized, dedicated system to store and update such information. You will need it in case there's an audit. And the next recommendation is begin planning the infrastructure optimization measures we've just discussed. Initiate this conversation with your technical department today or tomorrow, because there may be obstacles. Let them start thinking about it. It's in your financial interest. You can reduce the cost. You can increase profitability or competitiveness. These will be your foundational steps to safeguarding your infrastructure as a service business that involves Microsoft licenses. This is the time when you ask your questions. I have a couple I've just received in direct messages. The first one was, where can I find end user license terms? I already answered that question. It's a PDF that you must have been given together with your SPLA. It hasn't changed since about 2013. So if you find an old copy, it's still valid. If you have an old version, feel free to use it. If you don't have it, you can't find it, reach out to your SPLA reseller. SPLA resellers are obligated to help you, obligated to help you find it. This is how you find it. It's a standard PDF form. The other question, you once mentioned the SPLA compliance readiness checklist. Yeah, I did it in previous lives. Can I still get a copy? Yeah, absolutely. Just send me an email to ask@SAMexpert.com, ask@SAMexpert.com, and we'll share the checklist with you. There's no problem with that. Thank you all for your participation in today's event. I wish you a very productive rest of the week and all the success in your service provider journey. Goodbye, and I hope to see you again on our regular live streams that we have almost every Wednesday. Thank you very much.